Hello everybody, I'm Ari and I'm back to read yet another chapter by Starlight Over to Trot, a noir tale by Jessie Cat. This was a wonderful read. It is so long and awesome, and it's over on femfiction.net. A link should be in the description of the video or somewhere on this playlist. Anyways, if you're ready for me to give this a read, I am going to start.
Chapter 2. Your princess is in another castle. When considering what went wrong between the Cop Police Department and the Perimeter Aegis Control Task Force, it is important to remember that both groups were charged with maintaining order and protecting the city. The DPD hunted criminals, and the PACT hunted monsters, and the harmonious operation of the two was often necessary for the completion of this duty. Why they did not, in fact, harmoniously operate is not particularly a mystery. Over time, pride crept into the equation, and each organization collectively saw themselves as more important, skilled, and more capable than the other. Imagining in their minds that they were the sole guardians of the city, each believed that the top would ultimately collapse without their protection, and never stopped as a whole to consider that on this point they were both entirely correct. And thus the tribe was stuck with a situation in which the DBD and PACT saw PACT as a bunch of self-impressed cowponies with brains of confectionery and only a loose understanding of collateral damage, while PACT thought of DBD as lacking the fortitude necessary to control their bowels in the face of an oncoming medic or household pet. This was not a rift in any way mended when Princess Celestia donated the castle to the Detroit Police Department for use as their headquarters. The castle was a sturdy defensive bastion and eventually turned royal summer home when the borders of Detroit extended too far for the castle to be of strategic value. A few decades and renovations later, it would ultimately serve as a schizophrenic nerve center of the Detroit police, and as a continuous source spot for the PACT, said by the scholar.
Should probably move this. Okay. I awoke from my doze to gunshots ringing over the head. We were jingling over some terribly uneven surface that nearly bounced my teeth right out of my face when something bounced off the passenger side window, leaving a huge crack in the glass. Taxi shrieked in alarm, slamming on the brakes as I jammed the door open on the opposite side from the incoming fire and rolled onto the cobblestone before the car had come to a full stop. Kicking the bit of my gun into my muzzle, I carefully peered over the trunk, trying to find a target. When none presented itself, I glanced around for a second or two to realize we were not in a gang war zone. Instead, we were sitting in the old chariot loading bay leading up to the Detroit Police Office main entrance. We'd passed under its yawning portcullis and onto the avenue in front of the oldest building in the city. It isn't called the castle because some pony in PR thought it was a cute name. The tower proper looked like a monstrous onion sitting on an upended coffee cup, ringed with stained glass windows around the top. Its various portals, arrow slits, murder holes had been attacked by vengefully fashionable ponies intent on making them look like something other than draping of utilitarian fortress. Sadly, the addition of the old style canterlot gold leaf and alabaster just seemed out of place. Like cake frosting hurled against the side of a Pencil parking garage, even if the decoration hadn't started cracking and peeling in an effort to fit in with the weathered masonry. It was from the tower's shadow that a large Pegasus in a full-body black combat armor wheeled down out of the sky from one of the smaller, newer buildings, which crouched around the center pillar like an ugly duckling huddled around in their godly decorated mother. His military-style close-cropped mane was a shade sickly green, mixed with his brown face to make him look like a fool's hoof painting. There was something familiar about that awful color scheme. The stallion dropped down to ground level, skidding to a stop and tucking his wings back as two more troopers followed him down. They kept a respectful distance, but were still close enough to be backing him up. The other two were mares, wearing much of the same outfit. It covered them from head to hoof in thick black Kevlar with chromatic plates underneath, leaving only their muzzles and eyes exposed. Considering this was a humid day, they must have been hot as fresh phoenix shit. All three of them wore badges on their flanks shaped like apple trees overlaid by a unicorn's horn, sporting a pair of wings which shed across them in silver letters, Primer Aegis Control Task Force. Civilian traffic is restricted. We're having training exercises, he began in a vicious tone as I stood up, dropping the bit from my teeth and coming around the cab, intent on chewing 9 kinds of hay out of him. Taxi beat me to it, charging out of the other side of the cab and sticking her nose right up in his face. Taxi wasn't a small mare by any stretch, but the Pegasus was a properly big bastard, and his neck bulged with muscles. On reflection, I should have noticed the giant riot canyon strapped to his combat saddle, as well as those of his 2 companions, any one of which could probably have turned both of us into a fine mist. Its barrel was as big as my leg, and none of that, however, deterred Taxi. Did you just shoot my car, you goddamn bastard? Was your father a diamond dog, or is just stupid the new pack recruitment policy? Steam blasted out of his nostrils as his companions nickered laughter at his back. They're beanbag rounds, and your hack wagon is fine. You need a demonstration of just how fine it'll be, or are you going to clear the yellow piece of manure out from our engagement zone? He kicked his back leg, so reloading the mechanism ratcheted a fresh round into the chapter. Taxi growled at him, yanking her temporary police parking permit out of her saddlebag and tossing her feet. Manure? We're not civilian traffic, you stupid son of a bitch. Or stupid son of a... that's not censorship. I'm not actually sure what that word was, but it was unflattering and in buffalo. Maybe zebra? Possibly draconic. Knowing how far she'd ranged during her various spiritual adventures, one can never really rule anything out with Taxi or her choice of the invective. He looked down at the paper and then carefully stepped on it, leaving a muddy hoofprint. I decided to intervene as I saw her starting to slide back into one of those freaky zebra fighting stances that looked frighteningly like total relaxation. I wasn't really in the mood to peel the big idiot's face out of one of the rose bushes lining the boulevard. Okay, that's not true. Just wasn't in the mood to fill out the incident report afterwards. I slid between them and began gently pressing her back with one hoof on her chest. Taxi, give it a rest. Go park us. I'm sure this big fellow isn't looking for any trouble isn't looking for trouble any more than we are. Her pink eyes flicked angrily from him to me to the cracked window before she murmured, I'm going to put this on Chief's bill for this month. She better pay for it, Hardy, or you can take the bus until she does. Stepping back, she went around and got in, sitting there for a moment trying to collect herself. His attention finally turned to me, a huge grin spread out on his tree bark-colored cheeks. Hardy, as in hard-boiled, isn't that right? Stepping up, he pushed my hat back on my head, watching the muscles in his eyebrows lifting up as I registered the urge to immediately crush his small face. Ladies, we have ourselves a proper hero cop here. Isn't that right, Hardy? Too damn good to drive his own wagon, so the chief hires out some weird-ass filly to drive him everywhere. He looked up at Taxi. Is that her? The two mares accompanying looked at me and then back at Beefcake Moran as though sizing us up. Yeah, I obviously wasn't that high in their estimations. Taxi behind the wheel, taking deep breaths as she tried to get herself under control. She's not particularly temperamental, Billy, but he caught her on a bad day, like a train wreck in slow motion. He continued. Huh, I hear that creepy cabbie don't have no cutie marks. Some bizarro religious thing? Then he uttered, Hey, baby, you want to hang out? You and me ought to hang out some night. Maybe I can help you find your special talent. Whew, I winced. Most ponies in the forest knew the story about Taxi's cutie marks. It was a fable told to recruits on the dangers of undercover work. Most ponies also had the good grace not to mention it to either of us. Sure enough, the normally peaceful taxi driver threw herself out of the car. Oh, you want special talent? I'll show you my goddess damn special talent in amateur proctology, you. I quickly stepped in front of her. Taxi, that's enough. Let me handle this. She stopped short, one hoof hovering an inch from a particularly painful nerve cluster in my right front knee. She slowly lowered it. Turning, I trotted up to the towering pack trooper. He unconsciously braced himself to lift off, raising his wings. Sloppily? He obviously wasn't an experienced prowler, still I decided to go the diplomatic route. I studied him for a minute, and then looked at his badge. The name was there. Oh, yes. I knew he was familiar. Canyon, isn't it? He dipped his nose, eyeing me cautiously. I gave him a wide, friendly grin. Heck, Canyon, oh, Betty, oh, pal. Saddling up behind him, I threw one leg around his broad shoulders, and then turned him to face his companions. Anything to get him away from Taxi. I remember Kenyon here, ladies. Guess his daddy went ahead and got him into the pact after his little stint in, the police department traffic enforcement. He tell you about that? I didn't give them time to answer, but I could feel the back of his thick neck tensing as I gave him a little squeeze, which might have looked to an incident observer like a headlock. No, I guess they don't frown so much on those little breaches of protocol out by the shield. I turned to his friend, shifting my weight casually as I pressed down on his wing muscle. He got so drunk at last year's hearthwarming Eve party, he tried to stick his nose right in the chief's crotch. My smile had turned slightly vindictive, but there was a certain joy in his growing discomfort. Did she bug you so hard they had to replaster her office wall again? Can you know, pal? He shook me off and turned to face me, unconsciously running his tongue over his two front teeth. One was missing, and the other one was still broken and showing signs of recent dentistry work. His companions' faces were full of barely suppressed laughter, and the look in Kenyon's eyes were turning suddenly from embarrassment to, I wonder if I can kill this shithead detective with beanbag grunts. Before he could test out that theory, an older-looking unicorn in safety goggles stuck his head over the parapet on one of the lower buildings and shouted, Hey, Canyon! Andrew Scarper! Get your asses up here and fly like targets. If a dragon attacks the headquarters and the headquarters is hit, I will see it that broadside knows it was you three that let the ground crew sit on their flanks. Canyon quickly drew himself into a formal military sense, real hips together, flipping his tail in the air, and he took several steps away from me and shouted, Sir, civilian caught stray round. Just clearing them off. Make sure they get away. The unicorn cocked his heavy rifle. Get your butts in the air or I start shooting them on the ground. All three Pegasi gave powerful flaps, and their wings lifted off, nearly knocking me from my hooves and the resulting vortex. Kenyon's companions looked over their shoulders at me and then couldn't contain it anymore and started laughing uproariously as he slumped, hanging between his wings like a prisoner being dragged to his own execution. You know, maybe the day wouldn't be so bad at all. Taxi stuck her head out of the window of the car, tiny hint of grin the corner of her lips. Hey, Hardy, I She stuttered for a second and then seemed to find her words. Thanks for that. I shrugged it off. If you'd have hit him, I'd have to go for his gun. Either way, looking up at the castle's imposing edifice looming overhead, like a stern parent, I could have sworn I felt the chief gazing down at me with horrible murder in her eyes. Yeah, I don't want to do this. The cabbie made a gentle shooing motion with her leg. Go on, Hardy. The music is calling and must be faced. I cocked my head as though listening. Yeah, the music sounds like a prescription drug addicted unicorn with the power over my paycheck. Are you sure you don't want to just, shoot me here, like one in the knee, just to graze? She shook her head and revved the engine. If I thought shooting you would make it all better, I would have done it a while ago. I'll be in the car park. And with that, she was off, out under the porculus and around the side towards the garage. I tugged open the heavy and ornate front door of the castle and was immediately caught full force in the face by a torrent of paper and blast of air that almost shoved me onto my tail. Forms and files seemed to be raining from the sky, though they didn't make it far before two ponies dashed out the door past me to gather them back in. I could barely see the other end of the prince's former audience chamber. Chief's office, sitting directly over the throne dais, was invisible against the backdrop of the fluttering paperwork. Overhead, miniature torpedoes composed mostly of our officious garbage swung back and forth under the ceiling, dancing like a crazed, drunken snake. Several dozen uniformed Pegasites were trying with only limited success to get the control of the thing, which spat out bits of debris and then sucked them back in. Occasionally, lightning arced out and struck the ancient golden pillars lining either side of the wall, leaving black streaks. I pulled the door shut behind me. I had to dodge past a rushing grayish-pink earth pony who nearly took my head off as she tried to catch another set of escape files, which seemed to be intentionally staying just a few inches ahead of her. The noise was deafening. Celestia, help us. There are just some things in the world that do not call for magical solutions. It was an auspicious day many years ago when, during the height of the ambitious interspecies collaboration, some pony decided that filing cabinets were too heavy and inconvenient. The idea for the file cloud was simple enough. You enchant a container, in this case, the ceiling of the formal royal audience chamber, in a cloud, so instead of water, it holds, well, anything. Paper, mostly. Every pony was going to have a file cloud right in their own home where they could store a lifetime's collected junk. The pencil pushers in City Hall declared the greatest innovation of our time since the Shield, and the Detroit Police Department would be the first to be graced with all the efficiency and security this soon-to-be indispensable modern convenience could offer. Capitalism sarcasm aside, it did eliminate single-handedly an entire department dedicated to cataloging years' worth of paperwork. Just call up to the front desk and they would magically deliver right to your chair whatever you sent to be dumped in the cloud. It would literally rain evidence. Unfortunately, it was discovered only once it was installed that if you stored decades worth of stuff in one place, it was awfully easy to forget what you put in there. This necessitated a filing system almost as complex as the one it replaced to keep track of everything going in. There was also the problem that as more things were emptied into the cloud, the questions you had to ask the cloud to get back whatever you put in this became more and more specific. And as anyone who's ever dealt with a genie knows, asking the wrong question to a magical entity has consequences. There had been a few incidents of ponies asking for documents and receiving case files that were in unknown languages, for places that didn't exist, or about incidents which never happened or weren't going to happen for centuries. One pony asked for a groundkeeping ledger, wound up inadvertently receiving a case file for his own murder. Years of magical development, and what we've ended up with a glorified junk closet, which could intentionally defy laws of casualty and an entirely useless and disturbing fashion. Accounting was not pleased. Less pleased at the moment was radiophone telegraphia, the unicorn center of the Trot's PD information system and poster child for equestrian naming schemes gone overboard. She huddled behind an immense radio set which took up a full third of the vast room. Her face was pinched like teal lemons as she adjusted the chest-high bank of gems, knobs, and dials at Disney's speeds with her horn's magic, all while shouting into 3 microphones in 6 different voices simultaneously, as though she was one pony a cappella group. 4 separate headsets were hung around her neck, restraining her bright green mane. I pinned down my hat before the wind could tear it from my head and pushed against the paper storm, making my way through it over to her and hooking up my hooves at the edge of the desk. "Tally!" I yelled, trying to make myself heard. She didn't even look up as she slammed her hoofs down on another column. "We're a little busy at the moment, in case you didn't notice. Take a fucking number." Trotting around the end of the desk, I grabbed one set of headphones and pulled them off her ears. She glared up at me indignantly, but her expression softened when she saw my face. "Oh, Hardy, damn it, we're as busy as an opera bucker during harvest season with 2 busted left legs. Can it wait?" I shook my head, trying to keep my voice level, which was difficult in the den. I was having a perfectly wonderful nightmare, too. What on Equestria is going on with the Fio Cloud? And why is the damn pact outside blasting at cabs? I gestured towards the mass stationery notes and parchments swirling around the room. A flash of static burst from her headset. She winced, hit the mute button, and glared up at the spinning mess. "The pack idiots are here to do joint training exercises to make sure that the police department is up to snuff when we get attacked by megafauna. And one of their yahoos took a pot shot at the dome and found a chink in the protection spells. They blew off part of the control room for the subsenior matrix. We're venting matter from the intermediary nexi." Yeah, I shook my head, understanding very little of that. Telly was a brainiac through and through, and damn anyone who might be a few IQ points short. I pulled my cloak tightly around myself, lest it be swept away to the mushroom. "Has anyone been up there to try to fix it?" She shook her head, whipping her mane into her face. "You can't get close enough. You want to try flying through that mess? I'll be glad to give you a push." Her horn flared as she pulled a large red lever, which only seemed to make the tornado darker and angrier. "Damn it! The stabilization array is fluctuating." "I'm guessing that's bad." "Huh. Only if you like being a quadruped." As Tilly fiddled with her controls and trying to bring the raging crowd under control, I watched the cloud of tumbling Pegasus shooting back and forth around the edges, catching a bit of trash before they could escape and tossing him back in. From one of the masked cubbies, a darting pony, from out of the mass of cubicles and darting ponies, a tiny salmon-colored bolt blasted through the edge of the funnel. Couldn't make out who or what it was, but it rose towards the ceiling, nimbly dodging flying clipboards, ballistic notepads, Holding my hat to my head with one leg, I did my best to follow its progress, but after a moment it vanished into the center of the storm. Kelly was shrieking and tormenting. Who is that? Did anybody see who went up there? Someone talk to me. We've still got a containment on the evidence armory partition, right? Right? The speaker crackled as dozens of voices all tried to reply at once. Suddenly, entirely, without warning, their tornado vanished. Everything that had fallen or been ejected was slurped straight up into the air with a noise like a giant trying to get the last few drops of liquid out of the bottom of the glass with an enormous straw. All the Pegasi, finding themselves no longer fighting furious airflow, scrambled to catch themselves. A young buck in a lab coat crashed nose first into one of the pillars and then dropped unceremoniously into a stack of empty cardboard boxes. After a few seconds of stunned violence, every pony began quickly dragging themselves up and dusting their tails off, counting to make sure no pony had actually been sucked into the cloud. The now docile cloud was only occasionally letting out rumbles and crackles as it tried to rearrange everything back into its proper order. Almost entirely unnoticed, a small orange pony dropped out of the mass of white. Yeah, at first I thought it was some pony's foal who'd come in for one of those hideous bring your filly to work day, but as she got closer I saw she was wearing a ruffled uniform. Her mane was cut in that same silly military flat top style as the fins outside, and was a truly shocking shade of fluorescent red. If there was a Geiger counter in the building, she just set it off. She clutched a bucket in her teeth and fluttered towards us, almost losing her balance when one wing cramped from overexhaustion as she tried to land. Skidding to a stop on almost all four hooves, she came up just a few inches short of the desk and collapsed on her stomach in a panting heap. Telly glared down into the bucket at the little tiny pan. What? And then she paused and lifted the container in a telekinetic field, peering into the black mess inside. What did you do up there, cadet? Wait, aren't you that transfer from Pact? She nodded weakly and tried to stand, but her legs went out from under her. Almost immediately, she sat down heavily. Yes, ma'am. She tried a few more deep breaths before she managed. I repainted the thing with the bullet hole in it. The brainy old pony dipped one hoof in the dark substance, and then gave it a sniff. That's printer ink, huh? Accounting's gonna love this, though they'll probably hate it less than the armory containment breach. It'll hold from now. We'll need a more permanent fix, but more pressing issue is probably finding out where they punched through the shield. I huffed and tapped the wheezing young Pegasus on the forehead. Cadet? What did you think you were doing? You do know that cloud could have torn your damn fool head off. You know we keep weapons for murder up there. Actually, the evidence for armory container magic seemed to have held. Telly started, but I silenced her with a sharp look. And if they haven't, we'd had a tornado rolling around, spewing out knives and shooting hoof guns. This cadet's shoulders stiffened and she pulled herself upright. I fixed it, didn't I? I was watching the training exercise outside. I saw where the shot hit the roof. Her brilliant cyan eyes shot wide as she peered at my badge before yanking herself into a salute so fast she almost knocked herself cold with her own hoof. Sir, sorry, sir. Shutting my eyes, held a little deep breath, and then turned on my heels. Yeah, all right. Catastrophe averted by the scrub. Don't expect a medal. Telly? A strange look crossed Telly's face as she looked back and forth between me and the rookie. I couldn't quite read it, but there was a definite smile buried somewhere under the exhaustion. Telly? I repeated in a louder voice, and she looked at me, licking her lips as the smile turned into a huge, snarky grin. Yes, sir, detective, sir. I face huffed and then waved towards her radio set. Is the chief ready to see me? Tell me this mess isn't what she called me down here for. Hate to think the budget's been hacked off so completely she needs me for filing. What? Oh, no. Radio Penny slumped behind her desk and tapped a purple button lightly with a tiny flicker of her horn. Red emergency lights flashing all around the audience chamber quietly shut off. We got a call this morning on a death over on the side of uptown. Some pretty high profile. She sent the forensics bunch out there to get what they can, but the media got there before us and is making a fracas of it. Yeah, so what does she need me for? I asked, watching as a passing accountant with a stack of loose papers balanced on his head, trying to get around a small avalanche of garbage jammed in the stairwell that hadn't been pulled back up when the cloud had been returned to normal. Tully shook her head, pulling one of her headsets off to the side. Honestly, I imagine she needs somebody who can solve this quickly or sweep it under the carpet before the newspapers start howling about police inefficiency. Either way, she said, adding a gentle bow and a graceful hoof, it is but mine to listen and yours to jump like a bunny when she calls, lest she tears your nuts off and feed them to you. Sorry, I need to bite something. Thanks, Ty, for making it do the reward me link. I don't know why I did that. It's not supposed to tell you to drop that link. An indoor tornado wasn't the worst way I'd seen the day begin in the police department. It was right up there. And if that wasn't what the chief got me out of bed for, I felt a little worry plucking at my neck. Did you at least take the bullets out of her gun? The teal radio pony grinned as she yanked open her desk drawer, and 6 small caliber rounds rolled on the bottom with clatter. You know I've got you back, Hardy. Besides, I think I saw her take a few of the blue diamonds. Those usually mellow her out. Straightened my jacket, I threw out my chest, assuming my chance, and I hoped I radiated confidence. All right. Wish me luck. Telly snorted and shoved her door shut. You don't need luck. You need a tranquilizer gun and a royal intervention. Just try not to piss her off any worse. Some of us actually have to work here. I looked up at the stained glass window over the front of the chief's office, depicting justice of our patron in all of her glory. She, who wore a blindfold and clutching the flaming sword in her teeth, rearing to charge forth against the and the unrighteous. Her hooves were sheathed in golden shoes, and her coat was as burnished white. Rather dramatic, but still beautiful. I could see spindly shadows moving back and forth, gesticulating wildly as something out of sight. Tipping my head, I whispered a quiet prayer before turning towards the staircase up to the second floor. Telly and the recruit stood there together with sympathetic looks in their eyes as they watched me go. At least I imagined them to be sympathetic. Right up until Telly stage whips her to little Pegasus. If she actually ever kills him, I want his hat. I need a drink. Sorry. I stopped in the ancient hallway, one leg raised to knock on the heavily ornated doors to the princess's old chambers. The long hall was almost silent, feeling like a world apart, separated from the mad rush of the audience chamber. I'd been fine right up until I set a hoof on the extremely plush carpet lined on either side with ancient suits of armor. As I approached the beautiful forest fresco of the door, the weight of the morning seemed to drop on my head like an anvil, followed by a wagon and a piano. For a moment I entertained the idea that I could sneak back downstairs out into the cab and beg taxi to drive me to the other end of Equestria. That was a damnedly attractive notion. Celestia, did I once love this job? Was there ever a time when I sat bolt right out of bed and looked around and thought, yes, I want to face the mechanical horn triumph for breakfast? Actually, there was a time, several years ago, before my partner... No, put a break on that entire line of thought, Hardy. Death shadows you today. Taxi's words came back to me, and I tried to push them aside. But it wasn't happening. Equiside is like that. If you work there, death is always waiting, somewhere in the wings. Besides, it didn't matter whether or not I happened to like this job. I'd taken an oath. I'd put a hoof in a book of law and swore to serve and protect. That means something, right? It's not that I ever stopped feeling like I was doing the right thing in my life. My cutie mark says it all. A pony can know exactly where they should be and still want to throw themselves in front of a bus now and then. A cup of coffee might do me good, after all. The chief could only get so angry before she either had an aneurysm or fired me. She could wait 15 minutes. I was just turning to creep back downstairs when the wide double doors glowed brightly and then crashed inward, leaving me hanging there, turned towards the hall, and a guilty expression on my face. I carefully looked over my shoulder. Her high-backed chair was facing the other way, looking out over the rush of the ponies in the cubicles below. Quickly bearing the desire to bolt, I composed myself and marched across the threshold to meet my fate. The chief's office was vast and covered in gold paints, but it was mostly empty, save for a thick red carpet that stopped short at the edge of the huge but worn maple wood desk, which was a towering monument to the ancient royal order. It had been Celestia's at one time. It was just about the only thing that had been kept from the previous administration. The former head of the department was a big fan of antiques and jammed them in every possible corner. When the chief was elected to the position, she took one look at all that gaudy shit and sold it off to pay for the department's budget overrun. Two flat-backed chairs reminded me of ones at the head mayor's office in my old elementary school, sat facing the desk. And spent many hours in similar ones writing endless lines of things like, I will not help Sweetshine replace fruit in the teacher's lounge with unripe sap apples. There was a tiny bowl of peppermint candy and 3 perfectly sharpened pencils. 2 boxes labeled in and out sitting on her desk. The outbox stack of paperwork was significantly higher than N. Trying to be casual about it, I edged up to the desk and snagged a sweet from the bowl. Unwrapping with my teeth, I balanced it on the back of one leg and then flicked it into the air and tilted my head back to catch it with my lips. It never landed. It just hung there a few inches from my face, shimmering slightly in the sparkling field of unicorn magic. The luxurious appointed chair slowly turned around, and police chief Irish Jade smiled down at me like a predator whose particularly stupid prey had just waltzed into her den. Her platinum silver mane hung around her skeletal frame in a stiffly coifed lines that you could have used for a measuring stick. Her pelt was a harsh shade of emerald that contrasted badly with the chair, but it went perfectly with the tailor-made business suit clinging to her like loose flesh. Each of her eyes seemed to focus on a slightly different part of my face, and her pupils were simply gone, lost in the corneas in the same shocking green as her body. Her horn was polished and shined, with the tip ground to a dangerous-looking point. She watched me in silence for a few seconds, and then the peppermint floated over and dropped between her teeth. She bit down, and the crunch reminded me uncomfortably of breaking bones. "Good morning, Detective. I'm glad you could grace us with your presence here on this beautiful day." Leaning forward, she put her hoof on the desk and slid off her seat to stand, watching me with that unsettling grace. I climbed up into one of the chairs, gathering my legs underneath me. "Glad to be gracious, threatening my life before breakfast is probably against the law. Where's the case?" I plucked off my hat and brushed off a stray piece of note card from the mess downstairs. "What makes you think there's a case?" she inquired, tilting her head. One of her pupils chose that moment to reappear, lending her a slightly mechanical expression. "What makes you think you're not here for me to take a skinning knife to your flank?" I clapped my hoofs together and did not say, "Because Taxi said there is." I spoke to Telly. Besides, if you were going to fire me, there would have been balloons, cake, and a gala downstairs. And let me say, I was way more impressed back when it was take a carrot peeler to your dick. She said nothing, but the drawer of her desk slid open, and the vegetable skinning instrument in question floating out to hang midair for several seconds before dropping back out of sight. I swallowed sharply, and my jaw snapped so fast I almost bit my tongue. I love Jade, by the way. Wrinkling her nose, she lifted 2 files out of her inbox, shoving one across the table to me. I cut at my teeth and unfolded it, looking over the initial report, which is please speak for transcript of a panicking idiot screaming into his telephone. It said murder, misadventure, suicide across the top, below the address. Fine, you're right, as much as it pains me to admit. We're overloaded at the moment, and the case came in this morning has taken on a certain importance because the media managed to hear about it before we did. One in the cleaning staffs at the High Step Hotel called every paper and news station in the book before they called the police department switchboard. Reporters were crawling all over the scene for almost 15 minutes before we got there and managed to clear them out. I winced and folded the folder in half, weighing it into one of my extremely deep coat pockets. While I am from a school of investigated thoughts that say forensic tends to muddy otherwise cut and dry cases, they're still essential to the job we do, which is finding the criminals. Simple enough cases have been flat out ruined because some pony stuck his hoof in the wrong puddle that thought the crime scene covered in reporters, And the thought of crime scene covered in reporters made me want to weep. Though that's not the only reason I needed you here today. I happen to have some fantastic news. You'll be overjoyed, I'm certain. Leaning over, she reached down into her garbage can to retrieve a battered phone. I've been on the line with Mayor Sniffner all morning about the latest budget modifications. A sudden worry twisted my mouth. Right, budget modifications. And what does that actually have to do with me being in the office? I asked nervously, lowering my chin on the seat. She grinned even wider, and then touched the radio call desk button in a voice so cheerful I almost threw up. You're getting a partner. My ears shot straight up in alarm. Wait, what? No, that's fine. Taxi is plenty. No, she's not official, but the last time we tried this, the pitiful pissant you set me up with almost shot himself in the leg. Juniper... But she swept her hoof down on the desk and cut me off mid-sentence. Juniper is dead. I know you and he worked well together, but it's been more than 2 years, and I can't justify the expense of that cab for one officer. Pushing myself off, I yanked my fedora over my ears and started for the door. I'll be on the crime scene, doing my job. I don't need this shit. If you find some pony dumb enough to ride shotgun with me, do us both a favor. Fire them? Might save a life. Jade shrugged eloquently. It's a partner or a desk job. Take your pick. Frankly, I'd love to see you around the office more. I need somebody who can make a decent cup of coffee. That brought me up short. I turned to stare at her. There wasn't even a hint of humor in her sharply angled face, nor was there sadistic glee as I expected. It was more like exhaustion, which she covered quickly by sliding back into her seat and plucking another candy from a bowl, shelling it open and crunching it loudly. At that moment, her pupils expanded so wide, her eyes looked almost black. Right, not to self. So don't eat anything on the chief's desk. And I wondered, not for the first time lately, what was actually on her mind. She was straight as an arrow, and replaced a corrupt son of a whore who'd driven most of the apartment into almost the ground. When she joined the force, every pony thought we were getting a bureaucrat instead of a cop. We were proved wrong after she managed the first actual drop in violent crime rates in almost 3 decades. Over the years, she relaxed. A little. The alternative, her representative, was probably insanity. Though I can't say the work left her completely ineffective. Her copious medication intake was tolerated open secret. So long as the job got done, no pony objected too loudly. It was a common enough story in Detroit. She took the job because there was no one else competent or crazy enough. Still, there were a few odd incidents when she got into her pill bottles mixed up. Sure being it is entirely possible a purple dragon could have been eating the lights from the city traffic signals, but that didn't make the APB and fruitless citywide lizard chase sound any better than on the 6 o'clock news. I'm hearing beeps. You're serious. Which poor fool did you con into this? Was it Cheese Nip or no. Not creamy goodness. He can barely leave the office without disinfecting his hooves. Jade pushed the folder across her desk. Okay. Some kind of notification, but I'm not seeing it right now. Yeah, I'm not seeing it right now. But caught it with a flicker of her horn, holding it just out of reach. The phone bleeped softly, and she raised her voice towards the big double doors. You can come in. The hinges creaked and swung in a few degrees, and then a familiar neon orange head poked around the edge of the door. It was that little Pegasus. She managed to straighten her collar and was no longer breathing hard, but her tail was still a bit messed. Her cutie mark, which was a sword crossed with a crossed sword and a fountain pen, still had some shreds of paper stuck to it. She was armed, well, technically. Her bit dangled comfortably against her knee, but her weapon in her holster was a .32 Philly edition semi-automatic. It had the stopping power of a thrown gerbil and couldn't have been any more girly if it had been pink. When my brain made the connection that this was supposed to be my new partner, I jumped up so fast I almost pulled a muscle staring at the .620. You're joking. The new crew cringed. I lowered my voice. What am I, a babysitter? You can't be sticking me with a rookie. Iris flipped open her folder, flicking it through the loose pages. I'm afraid so, Sunshine, Detective Hardboil. I want you to meet Officer Swift, right? Swift, was it? Swift nodded and tried to hide her proud little smile. It's Cadet, ma'am. Chief cocked her head. Oh, Cadet, right. Okay, step up here. A tiny book lifted out of the center drawer of her desk and then landed in the front. Swift scooted forward a few inches, her eyes widening as she saw it titled. It said, Laws and Rights of the Land in Equestria in silvering font. Put your hoof up here. She was so small, she had to lift off the ground with a few flaps of her wings, raising to just the tips of her rear hoof shoes so she could reverently lay her fetlock onto the book. With a hint of a smile, Jade said formally, Do you swear to serve the citizenry of our fine city and protect them with your own life? It took the much smaller pony several seconds to respond. Tears gathered in the corner of her eyes. But when she replied, her voice only wavered just a little. I promise, ma'am. The book lifted and dropped back into the drawer and Chief rubbed her hoof together. All right. Can't have a cadet riding with a detective. Effective immediately. You're promoted, Officer Swift, and welcome to the Detroit Police Force. Jade looked at me and expected me, and I couldn't do much more than stare at the fowl she dropped in my lap. The cadet, Swift's fur, was so bright it actually hurt to look at directly. She was swelling with pride, and the smile split her face. I was worried she was going to sprain a cheek muscle. I dropped my rump onto the carpet and sighed. Kid, I've got to ask, did you volunteer to work with me? She nodded, and then unbuttoned the front of her heavily scratched uniform vest and rooted around inside, coming up with a raft of paper spreading them on the floor. Yes, sir! You don't have to call me sir. This isn't pact. Call me Hardy. You can call me detective if you pathologically must. Yes, sir, detective! I reached out and grabbed her hoof as she tried to salute me. She quickly put it back down, her ears turning a slightly darker shade of pink. I realized she was blushing. Princesses lend me strength. All right. So what sad sack pointed you in my direction? I can't imagine it was your career counselor at the academy. Her eyes started to Chief and then back to me. I read your file, she stuttered, and then shifted to familiar recitation information. Detective Hardboil, 6 recommendations on file, highest case closure rate, wounded in the line of duty twice, 15 years in the force. I reached out and put a hoof over her mouth, and she stopped short, cracked a tiny awkward smile. Methinks someone gave you a slightly trimmed version. One missing a few essential details, I muttered quietly, giving Jade an accusing sidelong glance. Jade leaned forward and clicked her tongue, her voice dropping to a consenting tone, so I felt my gorge raise. The Pegasus didn't seem to notice. Officer Swift, show Hardy here your letter of recommendation. Swift picked up a heavily creased sheet of office stationery from the papers on the floor, holding it to her lips so I could read it. I quickly scanned the typewritten note. Dispatched to Detroit BT District 1 main office from PACT, Perimeter Aegis Control Task Force, District 6 Shield Guard. I hereby formally recommend that Cadet Swift Cuddles be transferred to the police department where her heroism and bravery will be a great benefit to the city of Detroit, and I look forward to watching her career develop. Some of you may be familiar with the recent incidents with the latest batch of PACT recruits. These include escape and a recapture of a cockatrice meant for the training purposes, the damages caused by underweight cadets trying to handle standard munitions, and the climax of these events was during the final set of the entrance exams, mid-flight attempt using a Skybreaker flak cannon, a weapon made for a pony twice her size. The recoil sent her rocketing backwards through 2 windows, a door, and onto the department border collie. While this was the most prominent part of her training record, this was not the most amazing thing I saw Cadet Swift do that day. I wasn't even there when she stood up, hefted her weapon she could barely lift onto her back, and tried a second time. What really struck me is that she picked herself out of the foamy wreckage of the break room soda machine, got on her feet, and got ready to try a third time. I sincerely believe she would have brought down that entire training facility with her spine if we had not stopped her, and says far more about what kind of pony she is than her range scores and track record times ever could. She may not have passed the PACT qualifying exams, but her devotion would have made her an excellent trooper. After rescuing a reporter and several members of her own training team, including her instructor, from a rampaging cockroach, we cannot simply abandon her because fate saw fit to give her a body too small to use in anti-megafauna class weaponry. She can still be an asset to this city. If it cannot be in pack, let it be in the city police department. Equicide would fit her. Her cracked marksmanship and masterful flying will prove invaluable. Yours, Lieutenant Grapeshot. And then down at the bottom, P.S. Swift, if you read this every night, your boss won't be able to. I remember what you did with that love letter in flight camp. I looked up from the letter. Swift. Cuddles. Her nostrils flared and she breathed a little bit as she set the note and folded it back up. Right, she has a problem with her own names. Swift, if you please, sir, she said as evenly as she began to gather up her papers. The chief shifted her chair and cleared her throat, smiling far more pleasantly than the situation warranted. You two can get to know each other on the way to High Step. I think this might be the start of something beautiful. She was all but singing. My shoulders drooped. Chief, I started, but she lifted her coffee mug and jingled it threatening. It's this? Or you can start your new position in the morning. I like my coffee extra sweet with lots of cream. I turned to examine Swift again, trying to wrap my mind around how life could have possibly gone so wrong so quickly. At last, I addressed her directly. All right, you can shoot, you can fly. Anything else you can do? She looked from me to Chief and then back to scuffling her hooves in the carpet. I can write? Her ears spread. Sir, please, sir, detective, just give me a chance. I can do this work. I won't disappoint you. Her expression matched her tone of nervous desperation. Yeah, too late, kid. Chief dropped a second file in front of me. The tab said Swift Cuddles on the corner, and I reluctantly picked it up and stuffed it in my coat. Officer Swift, could you wait in the hallway for just one moment? I need to have a quick discussion with my employee here. Swift got up and padded out with her head low, using one wing to drag the drawer shut behind her. Yeah, freaking dexterity pregnancies have with those things. Ugh. When she was gone, Iris put both forehooves on her cheeks, pulling her face out of shape a little bit, brewing in her thoughts. After about half a minute, she let her legs drop and set her shoulders. Here's the deal, Hardy. She washes out, and there will be a shitstorm lake of which the princes themselves have never seen. Read her file. That rookie made herself a darling of the newspapers before she was out of the academy. And if that shit falls on my head, my final act will be grab you by the throat with my horn and drag you down into the feces with me. I glanced over my shoulder the direction of the tiny Pegasus was taken. All right. Ultimatum out of the way. Why me? I can think of 5 other officers who need a partner more than I do. 2 things. She held up both legs and then tapped one with the other. The mayor is on a budget-cutting spree, and the lunatic cab driver was right near the top of his list of wasteful spending. We both know Sweetsign is still a great cop, badge or no badge, and I'd rather have her working for us than going freelancing. Gesturing towards the car park outside, she said her truth. I never busted her for it, but we both know she was singing sneaking out to the crime scenes after she quit. I acknowledged that with a little sniff. Yeah, and the other thing? Chief pointed towards my coat, where the coat with one leg where the rookie's file was tucked. That kid has got huge guts but needs the experience. Her file reads like a cheesy superhero novel. Top marks in questicide training and marksmanship. She graduated in 6 months. Last pony who did that well was... She shaved her foreleg in my general direction. My, how the youth doth pass. I weighed my options, my gaze fitting between the coffee cup, the chief, and the arching doorway, and realized there wasn't any. She had me by the balls, and we both knew it. Right now, it was mostly a matter of whether or not I was going to submit gracefully or if she was going to give them a tight squeeze. The morning had started off so well. Leaning back, Iris picked a bit of mint out of her teeth with her tongue. She needs experience, but the only way she's going to live long enough to get it is to have somebody around to keep her from stepping in front of a bullet. You, in turn, could use a fresh pair of eyes and a dose of youth. I hiked up my coat and tried to smile, managing a tortured grimace. Fine, after all, you, of all ponies, would know about dosage. I barely made it out of the room before the phone smashed against the wall where my head had been just a few seconds before. I want to eat a couple of nibbles of candy because, well, this chapter is semi-long. Not the longest one, but, I need a small break. And to figure out what all the attention on my phone is. Oh no. That's cute. Awesome. Okay. One of those beeps was you, Ty, following my Amazon Prime account. Alright. Back to reading. I slammed the heavy portal shut beside me, and then leaned back against it, trying to even out my breathing. My mood was shifting crazily between fury and anticipation. The anger, well, Anger and I are old friends. I'd gotten a new partner, yes, brilliant. One who could use a gun and apparently finish basic and record timing. Yeah, amazing. A flash-sent female flying turkey barely out of diapers. Fan bleeding-tastic. On the flip side, a new case, a new mystery to solve. New criminally inconvenient places to shove my nose. A hint of joy was sneaking around the edges of my black mood at the prospect. My cutie mark felt just a little warm. The cockles of my bitter old heart swelled with whatever it is pony heart cockles swell with. I glanced around for the rookie, but she was nowhere to be found. I poked my head behind a row of armored suits, and then inside one or two of them before my cobweb brain finally said, Pegasus, look up, you dumbass. She was hanging near the ceiling, closely examining one of the vast painting frescoes. Swift radiated gilt like a 100 arc-no-watt bulb. Her tail was tucked behind her back leg, and her shoulders haunched right up to her ears. She'd obviously been listening to my little exchange with the chief. Okay, so she's not stupid, but probably too nosy for her own good. Now, who does that remind you of, Hardy? How much of that did you hear? I asked, and her ears splayed out to either side of her head. Reluctantly, she began to descend, dropping to the carpet almost soundlessly. Sir, I don't know what... Okay, yeah, playing innocent is going to work for about 5 seconds before I clop you upside the head. I know professionals who can pull up the innocent when they were facing with life in hardest correctional. Her expression turned almost comically horror. I swear I didn't mean to, sir. She sputtered, her wings shooting straight out to the side. They were the color of Robin's breast and seemed to be like the only part of her that wasn't fun-sized. It made her look strangely like she hadn't quite grown into them. I cocked an eyebrow at her and she slowly deflated, collapsing onto her rump and hanging her head. I'm sorry, sir. With a wiggle of ear, I said past her, I don't care that you listened in. You would have been an idiot not to. She lifted her head, staring after me. I could feel the skeptical look, but I pointedly ignored it. But if you're going to peek through keyholes, you might want to learn to play poker. You lie like a blank. Before she could respond, I headed for the spiraling stairs down towards the lobby. She followed an embarrassed silence that was filled by an irritating voice somewhere in the back of my head, declaring me Equestria's biggest prick. Thank you, little voice. The hangover wasn't enough this morning. I needed the guilt, too. Oh, you're welcome, asshole. Telly was managing to clean up the office as I edged down the stairs, trying to be inconspicuous. She stood at the radio console, giving rapid-fire orders in 3 different simultaneous voices through half a dozen microphones, which floated in a circle around her head. With the indoor weather under control, business was slowly returning to normal. I could still hear the gunshots outside, but they were fewer and farther between than where they had been. Swift edged up behind me, peeking around the corner, and then asked far too loudly, Sir, why are we sneaking around the office? There was no way for a pony of that color to be stealthy. First days tend to be a little messy around. I started to reply under my breath, but Telly's hearing was almost as good as her vocals, and she raised her head and grinned a huge grin, tossing aside the mics and raising hers. She almost purred as she heard, Hardy, you weren't trying to get out without frosting the screw up, were you? Without waiting for me to respond, she raised her horn and shot a blue ball of glowing light, soaring to a visible point just beneath the cloud. Every pony stopped what they were doing and started rooting in their desk. My tail dropped a little as I realized by this point it was inevitable. Suddenly I can't breathe, hold on. Do we have to do this right now? Oh, you know we do. Can't have a rookie on the street with unfrosted now, can we? Sir, what does frosting a rookie mean? The nervous note that crept into the Swift's voice as she realized correctly, perhaps, all was not well. Sorry, kid, I didn't do my best. Try to breathe through your mouth. The unicorn was almost bouncing on her hooves. Goody! Her horn flashed, and Swift levitated off the ground with an alarm squeak. Struggling for a moment, she tried to beat her wings, but ended up just hanging and flailing like a frightened goose. I almost felt sorry for the kid. The office pony started chanting softly at first, and then growing with volume. Frosting! 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 I reared up and gave her a gentle push. She soared over the cubicles as cheering rose to a crescendo. A spray of chocolate syrup out of one of the cubes splattered Swift's police barding. That was the signal. Egg yolks started flying, and then bottles of silly string. Halfway down the room, some pony had managed to land some powdered sugar on someone else's desk and earned a return fire in the form of a water balloon. Everyone joined in. Grizzled old veterans who'd seen more bodies than gravediggers cackled as they tossed cupcakes alongside the department accountants who'd never had a gun strapped to their foreleg. There's no word for the kind of mess that ponies with quick clean spells can make when they have permission. Dignity aside, I was trying not to laugh as the Pegasus dangled over what was quickly turning into a melee almost as messy as the tornado. Telly was less restrained as she rolled around on the floor, beating her hooves on the carpet as she giggled like a school filly. After about 10 minutes of very tasty siege warfare, I reached down and gently whacked Telly's blue-green horn with the hoof tip, letting out an alarming noise like a struck bell as she winced. The magic around Swift evaporated, and dropping the sodden rookie on one of the male ponies with a wet splash. I tried to look exasperated, but I couldn't completely hide my smile. Alright, are you satisfied? Telly wiped a stray splash of syrup off her nose and then peered over the office, which looked like an explosion in a candy shop. Very. Somebody needs to call the janitor. It was a further 15 minutes before we managed to drag Swift to the front of the line of ponies, waiting to have the congealy muck magic off their hides. I took a quiet seat in an empty office and put my legs up, dragging out my... I was going to have to get used to saying that. Dragging out my new partner's file. A stray piece of paper dropped from between the two sheets and fluttered to the floor. Reaching down, I tried to pick it up with my hose, but horseshoes are not the ideal instruments for picking up anything perfectly flat. I was reduced to licking the back of my knee and then sticking it to the note before lifting it onto the desk so I could read it. It was a mouth-pen note on packed stationery with the ridiculously seal in the left upper corner. The ink was still a little damp. Dispatch to Chief Jade. Cadet Swift Cuddles. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. The cadet is, simply put, an issue. You've probably read her file by now, and if you've not, go do it. Pay attention to her psych profile. She's convinced she's going to be some kind of champion of the people, and has a list of pathologically complexes that you only find in serial killers and war heroes. Well, I don't need either a wannabe hero or a nut job flying in the field. She spent half her training with her nose jammed in a novel and the other half damn near killing herself on the obstacle course. Sure, she posted a couple of records, but pack teams are cohesive machines. One cog out of place and the whole thing comes apart. Heroes get killed, and then everybody screams and hollers about their noble sacrifice, which only makes for more damn heroes. Heroes like that are parasites. If you're smart, you'll beat them over the head with a tuba and then dump them in the woods. In any other situation, I'd toss her out in her ear, and she'd probably get eaten chasing down a dragon by herself. Unfortunately, when she saved the newsmare from the cart race, she complicated matters. I don't need to stir up even more bad press by letting her wash out. The Griffin refugees in town are causing enough of a shitstorm, and I don't need another incident with the deluded rookie. Thankfully, I spoke to City Hall this morning, and the mayor and I see eye to eye, and I am therefore transferring her to the police department with the mayor's blessing. A desk job isn't an option for this one unless you want her to trying to slay the fax machine. Put her to work. Stick her in front of a train. I don't care. If you've got someone whose life you want to make miserable... Okay, I'm sorry. I need a second to say this next line with a straight face. If you've got some pony whose life you want to make miserable, give her a partner. She's your problem now. With respect, Colonel Broadside. Pact. I'm not reading the name of that. Just as I read the last few lines, my heart slunk right into the pit of my stomach. Great. Just beautiful. I sighed, refolding the note and jamming it back in the folder. There aren't a lot of things to be afraid of. Yeah, Bullock kept me down. Some days I think that'd be a relief. But a child who thinks she's the one who's going to make the world a better place. That's scary. Swift poked her nose through the door, smiling sheepishly as she pulled her uniform shirt back on and buttoned it, and then shrugged her gun onto her leg and wiggled into her bulletproof vest. Fabric white again, she was still scented a little bit like chocolate and squeezy cheese. Sir, did you know they were going to do that? I sat up and shoved myself back from the desk, easing on all fours. I was trying to get us out without that little ritual, hence the sneaking. Straining her vest, she sat back on her haunches and sniffed at the leg hole and then made a face. I still smell like everything. It's fine, hardly noticeable. Speaking of things I've noticed. Been sitting here reading through your file. Yeah, okay, that wasn't entirely true, but I resolved to give the actual document I went over later on, and I was curious. Why take the transfer? You passed most of the physical parts of PACT, minus the ordnance training. Why the police department? It seems to me like a strange step for monster hunting. Oh! Her nose wrinkled just a little bit. Oh, what? Come on, kid, spit it out. Putting her rear hooves together, she screwed up her cards. Sir, I gathered you didn't want a partner. If you want, I'll put in a transfer to another department tomorrow. I blinked at her and then shook my head. Pegasus would have to be a stupid prig not to put it together, but still, it was more blunt than I was expecting, and I had to think of how to respond. It's not that simple. Look, you're not the first pony I've worked with since my last actual partner. But there wasn't anything in your file about your other partners. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Didn't you find it the least bit curious that the department policy says every partner needs a pony for field work, but I'm flying solo? Well, yes, but, sir, your record? Which doesn't mean a thing if the chief can't justify the expense of keeping me on. There are some circumstances which our bride will gleefully tell you about, I'm sure. The chief is looking for a reason to stick me behind a desk. If I ditch another partner, accounting will hand her one. But what about me? What happens if we don't work out? I didn't feel like sugarcoating the truth, and damned if she didn't remind me of some pony I used to see in the mirror so many years ago. This was annoying as hell. Honestly, the mayor's fat trimming mode right now. One of the first places he loves to do is cut our budget. Means whoever's lowest on the totem pole. That means you. If you don't have a partner, the union will give you to the mayor on a plate as a sign of goodwill, so somebody else can keep their pension. So I ask again, why the police department? My reply didn't seem to comfort her in the least, and her tail wrapped itself tightly around her leg. I am... Shutting her eyes, she murmured something under her breath, though it sounded like a long list of names. Say again. Oh, it's something I do when I'm nervous. She tucked her wing back into her side. Beowulf, General, Hurricane, Victoria, Shining Armor, Shimmer Strike, Daring Do, Aurora Borealis. These are ponies that I admire, reasons I joined. They're ponies that made Equestria a better place. I tapped her folder, which I was certain had neglected to mention this behavior. Half of those ponies don't exist, and the other half are dead. She stuck out her lower lip suddenly. Does that mean I shouldn't try to be more like them? I'm not stupid. I know I won't save Canterlot or get to fight monsters, but I feel like I should do something more than my life than just write silly stories. I bit back a particularly nasty report that was spiraling around the tip of my tongue, and instead stroked my chin in contemplation. All right, fine. I just need to know you're not going to do something stupid and trying to play hero. I mean, unless you want to become the cautionary tale to tell my next partner. I know what my coaches taught me in basic. I will do what is right, even if I have to lay down my life for the city, but I'm not going to throw myself in the Manicore's jaw. Detective. Sir. I decided to let it go for now, but the alarm bells in my head were absolutely screaming that I should be watching this one before she managed to get herself turned into neon spray all over a wall. Fine. Come on, kid. We've got a dead pony to see. And I scooted off my chair and strolled around the desk out onto the royal audience chamber. After a moment, Swift followed. I really love how, like, little callbacks, little hints and stuff are thrown in from this series and from real life and stuff. Just absolutely brilliant. We found Taxi in the car parked, sitting on the hood of the cab, again making loud humming noises that sounded sounded just a little like a malfunctioning vacuum cleaner. Every second she'd take a deep breath and then start again. Swift examined the massive garage with a critical eye, moving past row after row of paddy wagons, chariots, and even some riot tanks. Her eyes lingered on the huge water cannon sticking out of the front of those, and she licked her lips nervously. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, why are we taking a cab? Why not one of those? Because I can't drive. I called to the cabbie. Sweets, are you ready, or do you need 10 more minutes to open up your tail chakra? Her shoulders fell as she eased off the car's bonnet, her eyes so closed as she unwound from the strange cross-leg meditation posture. Yeah, something was obviously bothering her, but knowing Taxi could just be poor energy flow in the garage. Hardy, do you really need to... Oh my goodness! She opened her eyes and caught sight of Swift. Her jaw just dropped and her gaze shot from my partner's brightly covered face to her badge, to her oversized technicolored wings. I wish I thought to bring along my hip flask this morning when I made introductions. Officer Sweets, I want you to meet Sweetshine. She will be our driver. Sweets, make nice. The chief has seen fit to give me a new partner. Swift out her leg, and Taxi looked like she was being handed a live electrical wire before reaching out and politely tapping hooves. Call me Taxi. She turned and gave me a heart shake. Hardy, you didn't tell me you asked the chief for another partner, particularly one so colorful. I held up my forehooves. Hey, it was news to me. She's a transfer from Pact. Taxi blinked and shifted her pink-tinged eyes back to the transfer. Was her IQ too high or something? Swift looked a little uncomfortable listening to us talk about her, but the discomfort vanished the moment she laid eyes in the cab. And her eyes lit up like a summer sunset celebration as she shoved her nose under the hood, giving a small smudge of grease on her cheek. Oh wow, you've got an R-code night travel with a full set of ruby and sapphire speed runes? How do you keep the wheels from coming off with that kind of power? She exclaimed excitedly. Taxi's chest puffed up as she lifted the hood. Tire rods are diamond heads, trust me. It's totally worth the price. That was more or less as the introduction went. I spent the next 5 minutes listening to the two of them go back and forth on the various aspects of magical mortaring. Nothing brings together ponies like a shared hobby. Finally, I found an opening when they both paused for breath. Right, Taxi, we've got a place to be, and the scrub wants to know why you're driving us. And I'm sure you'll be glad to tell her, but can you please do it on the way? Leaping into the back seat, Swift danced on the cushion, flapping her wings like an excited pigeon. Oh yes, I never get to go anywhere in a car. I eased myself in as Taxi got behind the wheel, putting a leg on Swift's back and forcing her to sit. Right. I'm thrilled for you. Mind if I ask how you know so much about cars? I thought Pegasi had about as much use for them as they have got for hot air balloons. Do you even have a license? No, but my grandmother taught me about cars and we used to watch races together. Your grandmother? Mm-hmm. Grandmother Glow is amazing. She's the one who taught me how to shoot. Taxi looked over her shoulder at the tiny firearm tucked under the Pegasus wing. I hope she taught you to fire something bigger than that. It might be a gun when it goes up, but right now I'd toss it back. It's standard issue. Yeah, and requisitions will be getting a nasty note about that. We'll get you an actual gun. Don't worry about it. I I affirmed with the toss of my black mane. Where we headed, boss? The checkered board maned pony adjusted her side mirror as I casually dug out the address from my pocket. High Step Hotel. And take your time. It's not like we're in a hurry. As we pulled into the parking garage, Taxi waved to the charcoal-coated guard on duty. I thought back to the dream of the night before. I'd never been the kind of pony that believed in omens, but that dream felt like a bad one. There are many things that can go wrong in life that you think you're blindsided, and it's more that it's more often that you just weren't looking very hard. I was praying that my eyes were open. Princesses save me if they weren't. Death doesn't let you go. Oops, sorry, wasn't looking. Mind sending that runaway bus at me again? Huh. Didn't catch that before. This train of thought was derailed by Swift, who cheerfully put both horseshoes up on the windowsill and was watching the city pass as she enjoyed the novelty of being driven. Ma'am, if I can ask, and Taxi cut her off. You call me ma'am again, and I will tan your ass with your own tail. Taxi will do nicely, and don't apologize. Swift's nascent apology, quickly predicted, died in her throat. Miss Taxi? Yeah. Taxi winced at the word miss, but Swift plowed ahead. Are you driving us? The cabbie gave an aggressive jerk in the wheel, swinging us 3 lanes across the slow-moving traffic into a hole between 2 carriages that I could have sworn wasn't there a second ago. Swift almost cold-cocked herself on the window, but managed to press her wings against the glass before she broke her nose. Still won't tell that one. Taxi smirked at the mirror. I pretended to study the back seat, trying to make it look like I didn't care. Get it over with. I don't need this day to turn into a game of get Hardy to suffocate himself with his own hat. Oh, fine. Swift, was it? The little Pegasus nodded as she put her hooves under her chin, listening intently. Sensing she had an easy audience, Taxi puffed up like a peacock. We're dipping way back into history, into the dark ages when Hardy still had a sense of humor and Celestial was in diapers. I am not that old. Yeah. Sure. She gave a sarcastic little whinny and went on undone. Anyways, it was way back when Hardy still had a partner. Not really my place to put that piece of history on the table, but they had a arrangement for the safety of every pony. Hardy rides, Juniper drives. It was the law of the land. Juniper was a genius behind the wheel. Hardy, commercially, might as well have been the worst driver in equestrian history. I put my forelegs over the edge of the seat and protested, Hey, sweet, the way I see it, cars have bumpers for a reason, okay? Swift looked really disturbed by that for some reason, but Taxi pressed on. Well, he and Jupiter were working a particularly nasty series of gang-related deaths. It was the Drillers and the Cyclones crew fighting over turf. They got caught in the crossfire, and Juniper took a bullet. Thankfully, they called for backup, and the case was wrapped up pretty neatly, but Juniper was out of commission for a month and a half, leaving Hardy driving himself. Mr. Ladfoot over here managed to crash 4 cruisers in that period. 4! I sniffed indignantly. I was only driving 3 of them. The one in Canal wasn't my fault. Point being, Juniper got back on his legs, and all was well in his world. Well, She stopped, her gaze dancing wearily in my direction. Yeah, I brushed off the unpleasantness. I'm fine, just tell a story. She thought for a moment and then said carefully, After Juniper passed on, Hardy was left to his own devices. 2 weeks before he was set to go back to the beat, Chief dragged him into her office. She had this mealy-mouthed little shit. He used to work for the mayor's office, standing there with about 1,000 pages of wasteful expenditures he intended to cut. Closing her eyes to slits, she made a face that looked like constipated goldfish. It was surprisingly a good likeness of the guy. It was slimy stuff that might have gotten a lot of ponies killed. Seriously, he wanted to use low-grade shotgun shells and buy cheap-ass horse apple body armor. She pursed her license straps. Swift's eyes bugged out at the implication second, so he quickly patted police vest, which I then noticed was one of the armored models, feeling their reinforced plates. I'd long since stopped wearing the vest unless I was going somewhere I knew bullets would be flying, but I understood that urge. You're fine. We're getting to that, I offered, trying to calm her fears, but she still looked nervy. So why was he there? I lifted the side of my coat, flashing the gun. He wanted my driver's license and my gun here. The Pegasus let out a delighted squeak and jammed her nose in my coat. Oh, neat! Is that the magical caliber? It looks like... Oh, wow, I don't even know. What kind of weapon is that? Hey! You don't want to stick your muzzle in there. You buy me dinner first. I shoved her out of my lap with one iron shoe on her forehead. She sat back and looked disappointed, crossing her front knees. She was casting covetous glances at my weapon, and I patted my firearm against my chest protectively and answered, "She doesn't have a kind. She was made before they really put a standard on magic calibers." Oh, what does she fire then? What is it? What does she fire? Standard 45s. Pop had it converted to handle them. I've never even seen magical armor for her. They probably don't make it anymore. Oh well, sighed Swift. The hopeful images of crystal rays and magical blasts faded from her immediate world. Why would the accountant want your gun? Taxi signaled a passing cart to move into the flow of traffic so she could swerve into the suddenly unoccupied space, narrowly clipping the curb. It wasn't so much the gun as what it represented. He was one of those big corporate killer types who was the school of thought that everything should be standardized. Oh, that was Taxi. She explained calmly as Swift grabbed the door handle for dear life. Ah, yes. It keeps costs down if you have to buy one or two kinds of bullets. But your department gets as old as ours, and everybody tends to use weapons that have been passed down or whatever they buy themselves. He figured he could get the most successful cop to give up his special piece and use a department issue weapon, and could get everybody else to do the same. Swift groaned and figured her trigger a bit. I knew how she fit. I wouldn't have set a hoof on the street with that absurd pop gun on her leg to protect me. The rec office must have read her height and weight profile and laughed their asses off. A grin spread on her driver's butter-colored muzzle as she continued. So Hardy here marches into the office. That stupid son of a bitch asked for his parking pass, driver's license, and his cannon real casual like. Hardy told him, in no uncertain terms, to geld himself. Swift snorted, dissolving in a giggle heap that Taxi paused and waited for her to recover. You thought no pony had ever told him no before. He started shrieking about how he'd read Hardy's record and it'd be cheaper to hire a cab than let him keep driver, and how he was going to have him fired and court-martialed and charged with treason if he didn't give up his gun, and it was kind of embarrassing to hear. I raised my ears. Wait, I thought some pony told you this story. You were off running with the buffaloes when this went down. How did you hear him? Taxi dipped her nose, tapping the brakes, so I had to brace myself. Well, I had to keep some tabs on you to make sure you hadn't gone off on the deep end. What do you expect? I expected a soundproof office to be soundproof. It's okay, Ty. This is actually going to be dropped on YouTube. in a while. And I also will drop you a link if you actually want to read it yourself. Sorry, I'm not catching that you're talking more. I kind of get lost in the page and forget to look up every now and then. You know me, I don't know how to stream. She fluttered her eyelashes at me, making a face of cheebrick innocence. Telly was just, she might have activated the Chief's recording gem on her phone and taped the whole thing for posterity. Pure coincidence. I barely had to bribe her to let me hear it. Yeah, I'm sure. Well, Hardy marched right out and returned 5 minutes later with one of the old armored vests and one of the new ones. He tested the old vest over a chair before Chief or the accountant could say a word, and pulled his gun and shot it. It took the bullet. And then he shoved the accountant into the chair and threw the new armor over his head and said, "You want to cut costs? Answer me this. Do you think you're worth his life do you think your life is worth you budgeted for that vest?" This big bad corporate killer almost pissed himself. Swift stared at me incredulously. And you got away with it, sir? Cheeks puffed out like a bullpuff. Taxi tried to hold it in. She managed a full 5 seconds before bursting out laughing at the memory. "Oh no, my dear rookie, he did not. Jade suspended him on the spot. By his tail, threw him through the window with her horn, and left him hanging over the entire office." I put a hoof over my face, waiting for our driver to regain control of her breathing before saying, "I was hoping you'd edit out that bit. Hey, I'll tell a story like I want to tell it." Oh, where was I? Oh, yeah. So a couple of days later, a recruit was field testing the new armor in a small caliber round punched right through the weakness in that awful chromatic garbage. He ended up with a liver full of pottery and lead. If he hadn't been wearing his lucky coronet chain underneath his armor, it caught the bullet, and he got away with a nasty bruise. I tried not to grit my teeth as I muttered, "Yeah, it might as well have been paper mache. It went right through." Swift began nervously fiddling with her zippers and one of the armor pockets of her vest. I stopped her with a little tap on her leg, and I said, "Don't worry, we don't use that kind anymore." She nodded very slightly. "So what does this have to do with you being our driver, Miss Taxi?" I was getting to that. Well, the accountant ended up stuck in some backwater assignment, cooking the books at the prison. I think he ended up getting busted for embezzlement and locked himself up. So the chief did go over his work, and she found out he hadn't exaggerated about Hardy's driving. So she made a deal. What sort of deal? My partner's, whose infinite naivety was starting to get a little grating. I exhaled a breath I realized I hadn't been holding and replied, "The kind of deal where I never drive again, as long as I live, and I can have my badge back." Taxi happened to need something to do, so Jade hired her back as a consultant on the condition she got a hack license so we could put her on the official payroll. My partner shifted in her seat and looked about. "Why can't you just drive you around, or rejoin the force?" Taxi tapped her hoof 3 times on the gear shifter. 1, I need to take a cop driving course to get permission to have lights on this car. 2, part of my deal is I don't get shot at, dragged into court to testify, or have to do paperwork. She waved at the glove box, which she once kept absolutely stuffed to the brim with junk paper crime investigations on a daily basis. The box, now empty, had once been a microcosm for my apartment. And 3, the speed warnings have standing orders to ignore me. An evil smite mustered her lip as she chose that moment to abuse this particular freedom. She wrenched us over the median onto oncoming traffic to get the slow-moving earth pony towing a cart and covered, oh my god, I need a second because I have to read this sentence with a straight face, and that's going to take a second because I just caught this reference. An evil smile split her lip as she chose that moment to abuse this particular freedom, rush us over the medium into oncoming traffic to get around a slow earth pony towing a cart covered in a huge mound of cabbages, sending the cart right up on the sidewalk. We swung inches past the poor traffic cop, who very nearly had a heart attack getting out of our way. Swift squeaked, but Taxi quickly yanked us back into the proper lane. My cabbages! Of course, that part got left out, but you know. I rolled my eyes at her antics and added, "Your karma is going to look like a pub urinal after that little display. Also, I know you're very carefully not mentioning the other reason why you agreed to this game." Turning her nose in the air, I have absolutely no idea what you mean. So, you're saying you weren't sneaking onto the crime scenes. By the way, Chief apparently knew. I don't know if she twigged you to feeding me tips, though. She knew? Yeah, and speaking of that, are you up for some extra work today? Dead body at the shag stop for rich idiots? Cabbies? The cab pony's lower lip trembled as she fought her inner conflict. Look, I talked to my meditation group leader, and he said it's really bad for my internal balance. I think I'll sit this one out. Sure, no problem. We can handle this one ourselves. Right, kid? I tried to make it sound ingredient, but I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice. That didn't really seem to matter to Swift, though. The scrub almost vibrated with anticipation. I knew needling Taxi on a day like this one, like the one we had, was unwise. But the worst she would do would probably be, well, kick me in a nerve center and start my heart for several seconds. Regardless, she didn't reply as we drove on to the other side of town in a pleasant quiet. Swift went back to staring out the window, and I leaned my head on the glass, enjoying a few minutes of calm the world offered me before I'd put my brain to the gear. We were nearing our destination when the streets started to smooth out. The storefronts were no longer mom-and-pop grocery stores, The storefronts were no longer mom-and-pop grocers and pawn shops. Those were being neatly replaced by organic hay joints, lingerie stores, and organic lingerie stores. Putting aside the madness of the office and the altogether unpleasant bit of blackmail the chief had laid on me in the form of a rookie so wet behind the ears I was surprised her head didn't slosh when she nodded, I entertained the thought that this might be a decent day after all. Yeah. That feeling lasted all of 15 minutes.